Hello everyone, welcome back to OldSoulPodcast. My name is Bree, that's spelled B-R-E-I. Thank you so much. Today's film of discussion is known as The Breakfast Club, and, also known as another really classic John Hughes production. It was released in 1985, and it's rated R based off of IMDb's notes, and it's genre classified as comedy and drama. IMDb's statement or otherwise summary of this film is, and I quote, 5 high school students meet in Saturday detention and discover how they have a lot more in common than they thought. I wanted to discuss this film. There's always a reason, really. Sometimes it's just because I saw a film and I thought it was interesting, so I watched it and I was like, this is worthy to be discussed. I think people should really watch this. That doesn't necessarily mean that I loved the film or liked the film when I decided to discuss them. There's just something that pulls me in and makes me think, oh, this is worthy to be discussed, whether that's the stylistic or aesthetic aspect of the film, cinematography, just the way that it's shot could be a reason. The overall film could be a reason, like this one. This one, I'd say it's because I really love this film, and the overall aspect and story and message in this film is so good. So that's why, for this one specifically, I'm discussing it. But I don't want everyone to think that I love every single film that I watch. I try to give every film a constructive critique, especially if it needs it. If I don't feel like it needs it, then the film just speaks for itself most of the time. But yeah, so this is just my little briefing on why I decided to pick this film and just an overall understanding of what I think about when I discuss them in general. So, for The Breakfast Club, I chose this because it's really one of those films that are nostalgic for me, which doesn't really work in theory because this film was released in 1985 and I wasn't even born until 1997. But as my podcast title would, tell you, I am very much an old soul and really drawn into old things, specifically old film, and this is one of those starts. So, if you don't know, John Hughes was, because sadly he's not with us anymore, John Hughes was known as like the writer, he was also a director and he produced a lot of films, but either way, he was like the guy in the 80s, and he was known for comedy, but he was also known for drama, which The Breakfast Club entangles a lot of that web, but this is definitely just one of many of his great films. I just prefer a lot of his teenage angst YA films, but he did a lot of other films. You should actually just go and Google because it would take a little bit of time for me to go through all those films. Some of my favorites, even though I liked them a lot more when I was younger than I do now, but some of the ones that I really enjoyed and enjoy to a certain extent now are Pretty in Pink, 16 Candles, Home Alone, and The Breakfast Club. What I really appreciate about John Hughes is his ability, or was his ability, to capture the youth experience without dismissing their feelings. And I don't know if I've spoken about this before, but I really, really love YA just as a viewer, but I also really love writing YA in like coming of age, middle grade in general. So yes, I do like to write and I went to school for writing. So I really, really looked up to John Hughes films a lot. And today I'm going to sort of dissect them and the reasons why a lot of his films can be discouraging and problematic and toxic and upsetting, but you can still acknowledge things that still stand out years later. Not everything ages well. Some things weren't good back then that just definitely don't age well, but they shouldn't have been shown in films then either. But what I will say for John Hughes is that his ability to capture that said youth experience so well always translated on film. It never felt like he was just throwing a teenage, script, on file or on screen or whatever, and just using it for entertainment, and hoping that teenagers would go and watch just because a teenager was involved, which is what a lot of YA and coming of age has done and still do. This film doesn't feel like that, and a lot of his films don't feel like that. In fact, they're very raw and realistic and honest and heartbreaking, and even the simplest of characters that are very average still feel raw on screen. And I don't know how else to describe it, but it's one of those things where, you can listen to this and what I'm saying and then go and watch it and really see if that translates to you as well. But I think that's one thing about John Hughes that I always really loved and appreciated, is that he didn't make kids seem insignificant the way that a lot of people in films do. And what's really upsetting is a lot of the individuals who make children's opinions and views seem insignificant are adults. And it's sad because you would think that adults would understand since they've gone through it, but I do feel like sometimes adults forget what a weird time it is to be like middle school, high school, growing, puberty, dealing with bullying, things that make you stand out, whether that's a mental illness or something that's very prominent, and maybe it depends on your environment, your social class. There's so many layers and complexities to this situation, but ultimately Hughes is able to capture that every single time without making the kid the butt of the joke. Yeah, I wanted to take that time to really talk about John Hughes, and I really appreciate the work that he did, and I'm still going to be constructive and drag him for some things that are in his film, don't get me wrong, but I don't think that people should ignore the fact that he did some great work, and that's just what it is. Some other details. John didn't direct all of his films. He was very particular about everything. Like, he really had his hands in his films, and you can tell. That's why I just said John Hughes production, because a lot of the time, in the beginning of movies, it would say John Hughes production, but he was either producing it and writing it and directing it, or doing one of the three, two of the three, whatever. And he would be very specific about who he chose as a director and his casting. A lot of the time he used a lot of the same actors and actresses in his films, which you'll see if you do go and look up John Hughes films, or any of the films I just listed. Molly Ringwald, Anthony Michael Hall, who are going to be discussed today in this film, are in a lot of Hughes films. Just to note a few, he wrote actual scripts with the intention to have actors like Molly Ringwald in them. Like, he already knew who he wanted to be in the script, so casting was like a huge thing as well. So yeah, let's get started with the film. I think what I'm going to do, just because it'll be easier for me to sort of summarize this film, mostly because a lot of it just takes place in one setting. There are moments in the film where I wouldn't say the film drags, but the pacing is rather slow, but that's intentional. They're in detention, they're bored. I mean, the film directly, heightens on the aspect of time and how bored the kids are, or teens are. And, it'll close in on a few clocks. It'll have them doing really small, minuscule tasks, or just showing them in sort of, I don't know if it's a montage, but in a bored state often. So I think if I go from beginning to end, it'll get jumbled up and it'll not really be significant in that manner of describing the film. So I'm just going to go based off of the characters, some scenes that they were in that I really enjoyed, some aspects about their darker or otherwise more peeling at the layer of their characters in the film, and just kind of go from there. I think that's going to be the best approach. So I'm going to start with our lovely Brian, also known as the Brain, and the one who writes this incredible essay that they're all supposed to write at the end of the film, but they just decide that Brian's going to be the best bet, which they're not wrong. He did a great job. That monologue is really famous. It's really good. I will probably link this in the video. I don't know if this will be in the audio version for just my podcast release, but if you just type in The Breakfast Club monologue, you'll probably hear it. It's really beautiful. You should listen to it. Yeah, so that's one aspect about his character that I really like. I just like how he does that voiceover at the end and the beginning about who they think they are versus who other people think they are. And I think that's a very, very good overview of what is in stall for the film and also the ending. So Brian, our brain, also known as Anthony Michael Hall, okay? He actually played a lot of the nerdy trope, dorky guy in the majority of Hughes films. I don't know if he felt like he was typecasted a lot because of this, but he definitely played that role, although I feel like The Breakfast Club did a different bit of a spin on it. He was in another film known as 16 Candles alongside Molly Ringwald. I think at the time, Anthony Michael Hall he probably had just shot maybe a year ago or so from the release date of this film, which was 1985. So maybe a year or so before that, he had shot 16 Candles with Molly, or they were about to. Either way, it was really close, and I think they were dating at some point, and Anthony and Molly were actually the only actual teens on set. I will link some articles about this, just behind the scenes details that I learned just with years of watching this film and being really interested about behind the scenes, but also just things that I also saw again in some articles that I Googled. If you want to do more in-depth research, I think Turner Classic Films has a viewing of The Breakfast Club where they also just pop up with little captions of behind the scenes takes during the film, so you can sort of know what was going on behind the scenes. But I'll sort of tag some of those notes in just from my knowledge and from what I've learned over the years about this film, because I really love this film. And yeah, so he played a nerd in like Weird Science and 16 Candles and whatever. But in this film as Brian, he is very much the nerd brain trope. So his take in the film is that he has very strict parents who put a lot of pressure on him. And that's okay, I guess, to a certain extent with discipline, but I think sometimes parents don't realize how personal children take that, feeling like they have to be perfect, especially if they're like the oldest or the parents sort of given up on another child in terms of like getting them to be the way that they want them to be. I feel like a lot of the time parents try to live through their kids, and I think Brian is a great example of this, or they're trying to put up this performative image of what their kid should be versus who their kid is. Instead of taking the time to figure that out, they just force their kid into a corner, which is terrible. And Brian is a great example of this. And he talks about how he always gets an A. For one reason, he's smart. He gets A's naturally, so obviously with time, he's just not probably had to try as hard. And he talks about how he took shop because he thought it would be so easy. And by the way, he generalized thinking that shop was going to be easy because the people in the class, he even says, like, have you seen some of the dopes that took shop? Where another character known as John Bender says, I take shop. So, like, what are you trying to say? Anyway, Brian took shop thinking that it was going to be an easy A, but he got a wake-up call because he found out, oh, this actually takes skill and time, and my smart ass, maybe just isn't good at everything, and I don't know how to, adapt to not being good at everything. But the sad aspect is that he always feels like he has to be perfect, and he always has to have an A, and he got an F in shop. And not only is he incredibly embarrassed by this, because it's not just like he got a B or a C, he failed shop. It was either a D or an F. I'm pretty sure it was an F. And he is spiraling at this point. And this is kind of early to speak about this really heavy issue, but since I'm going based off of characters instead of just the overview of the film, Brian has a very troubling and heart-wrenching moment in the film. It always gets me every time. He says that he literally tried to commit suicide, essentially, because he couldn't deal with the failure of getting an F in shop. And the way that Brian, exhibits, he's crying, he's in this little huddle at the end, which is another great scene with all the other characters. And he sort of hints at it at first, and they have to sort of pull it out of him, like, why are you here? And I'm assuming, or it's sort of insinuated, that he's there because he had a gun. And they found a gun in his locker, right? So obviously that's not okay, and he got detention for it, but he really had a gun in his locker because he tried to commit suicide because he couldn't deal with the fact that he got an F. And he knew damn well that his parents couldn't deal with the fact that he got an F. How sad is that? And then there's like this dark humor where Allison, also known as like Ali Sheedy, I'll get into her name issue later, but she says, sorry about the noise, if it's like super loud and you hear water drops or a truck outside. I live in an apartment, and so there's only so much I can do about that. But she says to him, when they finally get this all out of him, like, well, was it a handgun? Like, what type of gun was it? And he says, flare gun. And of course it's like this really sad, terrible moment that really touches on suicide and how dark it can get for kids, realistically. And I think that people think, oh, that doesn't happen, they're just kids. No, that can happen. It's a real thing. He really hated himself for the longest time, that he was really willing to take his life because of it. And that is so gut-wrenching to hear, especially on screen while he's crying. That's very vulnerable. He's peeled at his layers at this point. He's gone from the top nerd, side commentary, often seen as not seen at all, often invisible in the film, to this heart-wrenching moment where he admits that he tried to commit suicide. And then immediately John brings in his comedy, and they bring up the flare gun, and everyone's sort of laughing. And you're kind of like, it's not funny, but it is kind of funny, right? And even Brian admits that. And it's just perfect. It's perfect. There's no other word for it. That scene alone is outstanding, and I don't think that anyone will ever be able to recreate that in the same way ever again. But it's perfect. And I wanted to sort of get into the idea of him being invisible, because I do genuinely feel like Brian often feels like he is invisible, and the only thing that makes him stand out is that he's smart. And so when he no longer has that as his, trophy, he doesn't really know what to do with himself, because he doesn't have any identity outside of that. At least he doesn't think he does, but he probably doesn't, because he hasn't really gotten into more of who he is outside of being smart. But even in the film, when everyone's talking, he's sort of shying away from Molly's character known as Claire and the princess. I'll get into that soon. And he's often spoken over or at and not really listened to, and that changes throughout the film, but you should really focus to his side commentary and how it's funny, but a lot of the time it's funny because he'll literally be having full-on conversations and no one's paying attention. No one is paying attention. So yeah, the small details add up a lot. It's super interesting. And I think that my favorite scene with Brian is the ending scene about his suicide attempt, but just because it's just really good, although it's very sad. There's like a few other scenes with him in it that I don't really have a favorite outside of that one, I guess. His commentary is just great though. Very good. I think his portrayal of the brain in The Breakfast Club is one of his best. Okay, so let's talk about the problematic John Bender. Let's start with behind the scenes. So Bender, also known as the criminal in the film, or the portrayal, performative, generic version of who he's portraying before the layers are taken off, although he's an issue all throughout the film. John Bender knows the way that he is perceived, and he gives that full force to everyone around him. From the moment the film starts, you know that he is going to be the center of the film. He is ruthless. His humor can be funny, and it can also just be super disturbing and upsetting. He essentially sexually assaults Claire, another character who, again, I will get into. It can't be ignored. I absolutely hate that scene. I wish that it was not in the film. Molly Ringwald has talked about how she had to sort of explain this actual scene to her own daughter and how upsetting that was for her and how much she realized that she hates that film. Not the film in general. Let me not say that. That scene in particular really hasn't settled well, especially in the age of Me Too. But obviously it wasn't okay then either, and Molly was quite young. She was a teenager, so that's a whole other layer of problematic when they were filming this. And yeah, it's terrible. There's even like a shot that closes in on her skirt. It's gross. I don't like it. There's nothing else to say. There's nothing tasteful about it. Not that that could be tasteful at all anyway. I guess it's realistic to see men being trash on screen. Because a lot of them are like that in real life. If you don't agree, that's fine, but it's a real thing that women have to deal with every day, is that men are constantly making life very difficult for no reason. Like, the patriarchy is a problem, okay? So we need to dismantle it. We need to understand that the male gaze is usually placed in a lot of films, and it's not really surprising that it would be in an 80s film. So yeah, it's disgusting. It shouldn't be in the film. I literally skip it. The only reason why I had it up to this time around when I was watching the film is because I needed to be able to do a thorough, constructive, summary, overview, commentary of this film. So I'll link that article that I found about Molly speaking about this film specifically, because I think it's really interesting and important for people to read. But yeah, I did not like that at all. So that's one aspect about his character. He also makes very fat-phobic comments in the film, which again, his character is kind of annoying. I'm going to say kind of annoying, but actually just really annoying most of the times. And then it just escalates really quickly to like almost hatred for this character. And it's intentional. And, he didn't write the script, so John probably, wrote some of that stuff that's an issue as well. But I also know that a lot of the film was improvised, so I don't know how much of that was Judd's take on the film. which is the actual actor's name, I believe. But yeah, I don't know if that was Bender, improvising that, or if that was John. It could have been a little of both, but I know that they improvised a lot of this film, and John really encouraged that for this film as well. So, he was taking that full on. I know he did not get along with Molly Ringwald on set or off set because he was doing method acting that, in which he stayed in character all the time. And his character is terrible and annoying and frustrating, and again, I mentioned all those other things. I think he makes a homophobic comment using the F word, and I do actually see that in the film a few times. Don't like that. The sexism, it's just everything that could be bad about his character is bad about his character. I think outside of the lack of representation in this film, there's no black kids, there's no Asian kids, there's no color. There's no color in this film. And I guess you could debate, this is in Illinois, looks like it's a Midwest in Illinois, and it's a suburb, but come on, there weren't any black kids that he could have put in this film without making them the butt of the joke. Sometimes they do that and they make them the butt of the joke and make derogatory and racial commentary in the film. John has done this with 16 Candles. If you watch 16 Candles, he's done this where the one character that's a person of color is made fun of, and it's fucking annoying, and I'm gonna call him out on this. I told you I was gonna drag John a little, and I'm not. I'm dragging him right now, so that's fucking annoying. But anyway, back to Bender. You want to like Bender. I know that it's intentional, that he's insanely hard to deal with. I know that John and this actor actually had a lot of arguments behind the scenes, and I think John almost fired him because of it. His acting was great. He played the asshole very well to the point he almost got fired from this job. And he was in character all the time. Whatever works, dude, but it was annoying, to say the least. And Bender there's this whole scene where he is fighting with another character known as Andrew, the wrestler, the athlete. We'll get into him soon. And he talks about his abuse that he deals with at home. His dad is physically abusive. He shows everyone the cigarette burn on his arm. No one believes him at first, which really upsets him. Throughout the film, he bullies everyone, including the principal. There's a lot of really good banter between him and the principal. And what's really great about the principal and Bender is that the principal thinks that he's one-upping him, but really all I see is a reflection. And let me break this down, and it has to be discussed with Bender because it's specifically with Bender that this principal is out of line all the time. Whew. Okay, I had to pause the film a few times when they were arguing, because the fact that this principal teacher felt like he could speak to this minor in this way pisses me off. I get it. Bender is terrible. He needs to be reprimanded for the things that he's done. I truly believe in that. But the problem is that this principal never gives Bender a chance. And it does seem like Bender has been to detention many times, and all the other characters are new to this, it seems, for this one specific Saturday. And he's going to be back many times after all the arguments he had with the principal. The principal even says, don't mess with the bull, he'll get the horns, you're going to be here the Saturday after that, and the Saturday after that, because of the comments that he makes. It's great to watch, but we can't ignore the fact that this principal is borderline abusive, and no, he is abusive and toxic, and he actually should be fired. The stuff that he got away with saying to this kid is crazy to me. Crazy. And he generalizes him. He doesn't even give him a chance. He's already stereotyped him as the criminal without him even breathing. And again, they probably had encounters that have led to this. I'm not going to negate that. And I know some kids are bad. But the way that he speaks to him, I mean, there's even an instance where he takes him into this closet and threatens him. He makes commentary to try to embarrass him, like, oh, look, we'll see where Bender is in 5 years. Like, really, dude? Really? He talks about, oh, don't embarrass me in front of the others. Oh, his poor pride. Oh, blah, 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 blah. Like, I think that the principal is an adult reflection of Bender. He's a bully. He's a bully, and he tries to act like he's better than this kid. But really, all I see is a reflection and a younger version who has potential to get better at least. But the principal is just old and clearly not open to changing. And that's the worst. Because at least with kids, depending on the severity of their, issue, there's potential to get better. There's time, or at least we always think there's time. But essentially, we assume there's time to get better. He's an adult. What's his excuse? I mean, he even has a conversation with the janitor, bitching about this chip on his shoulder that is like, oh, these kids have turned on me. And the janitor's like, no, dude, you're the problem. Why don't you see that? Like, it's even spoken about in the film. And to the end, he is an asshole. He is a direct reflection of Bender with a nice little suit and a nameplate on his desk. That's the only difference. To me, it's the same. It's so annoying. And anyway, Bender, throughout the film, he's being annoying, taking screws out of doors. Yeah, freaking running down the hallways. There's a great hallway montage with all of them. They leave to go to Bender's locker. They're all bored and they follow him. He goes there to get Mary Jane out of his locker. If you know, you know. And he stuffs it in Brian's pants. It's a whole thing, right, to hide it. And Andrew, another character I haven't mentioned yet, but he's the athlete. And he goes in this sort of banter with, it's more like an argument. They argue a lot in the film. But he argues with Bender, like, oh no, we have to go this way. We have to make sure we don't run into, the principal, because they're supposed to be in this secluded library and they're supposed to stay in there. And they didn't. So, yeah, it's great. It's a good scene, and Bender ends up being right, like, oh no, we went the wrong way, and so he distracts the principal while they go back and don't get in trouble. So he has moments where he is vulnerable, but they're very rare, and there's barely a moment where he's not talking in the film. I think when they're huddled up, he doesn't talk as much. I mean, he does. He sort of bullies everyone again, especially Claire. He likes Claire. That's obvious, but the whole idea of guys picking on you because they like you is so fucking annoying. Like, stop. Like, if you like someone, don't treat them like shit. Like, I don't understand why that's like a thing. Like, that's really a thing. I don't know if that's a thing anymore, but people used to say, oh, if he teases you, that just means he likes you. Okay, like, why were they telling young girls that? That's so annoying that I think about that, but essentially that's what he's doing, right? I think Brian also likes Claire as well, but it's a whole thing. And I'm not really interested in the romantic aspects in this film. In fact, I'm not going to talk about it outside of this moment. None of them feel authentic. None of the chemistry between the characters that they try to couple up in this film was necessary. I could have gone without it. They could have totally taken out Ali Sheedy, also known as the basket case, who I'll get into later. They could have taken out her little transformation thing. I thought that was annoying because she's perfectly fine the way that she is, but it's in the film, so yeah. This is the only time I'm going to talk about it. It didn't need to be in the film. I'm not going to talk about it because it's not really good and it's not believable. So Bender just is playing his role perfectly. If you really want to look into some scenes with him, just look them up. He's literally talking the entire film. I don't know what else to tell you. My favorite scene with him is really just the banter between him and the principal, which is throughout the film. Screws fall out all the time. He has some good moments there and good dialogue. And I really like the scene where Andrew like wrestles with him and gets him on the ground. You know, it's gonna be 2 hits, me hitting you and you hitting the floor, what Andrew says to Bender. And it's funny because it's the first time you actually see a physical representation of their power shift. You know, they're barking back and forth at each other the whole time, but eventually Andrew like gets him in a headlock, and I think it's funny seeing him like give in, and then of course he has to sort of like gain his pride back and then bring a knife into a fist fight, which is so stupid, and they don't end up like, nothing ends up escalating after that, but it just seemed so dramatic. But I'm gonna give it a pass because it's an 80s film and that's just what they did. They were dramatic. Films are still dramatic, but you know, if you know, 80s films just have another layer of drama. What else? Yeah, I don't really have any other favorite scenes with Bender, and I think it's just because he's in so much of the film, and a lot of the time he's just getting on my nerves. So, woo, Bender. I'm gonna take a short break, and I'll be right back. Okay, so in continuation, I wanted to talk about a few shots that I really liked. So I really enjoyed John's ability in the film to, not John Bender, but John Hughes, let me specify. John Hughes' ability to be able to shoot a film in pretty much one setting. I mean, they were in the hallway. There's like a small amount of time where they're in an office or they're in the gym. But most of the time, they are in this library setting. And that the film still continues to be very watchable in one space with 5 people. There's no car chasing scenes, there's no, dramatic fight scenes. It's just people in a room and good dialogue. Mostly improvised dialogue, by the way. So that's really interesting. And I think a lot of the reason why it works is because the casting is so incredible. And although I will say that it's disappointing that only 2 of the actors on set were really teenagers, the casting couldn't have been done any other way. And I will say that probably once in my life. I really don't like when they cast 20-something, 30-something-year-olds as teenagers in films. I think it takes away the authenticity. No one believes it, and it's annoying. Like, why can't you just put kids in movies that are about kids, right? I understand there's some dialogue that's like rated R, but I also do believe that there are kids doing all types of shit that they probably shouldn't be doing, and that's realistic too. But yeah, I don't really like that. But the casting is great, and I want to, give an applaud to John Hughes with that ability in the short time frame and in this small space with nothing, no glitter and glam. It just is, and it's good. And I really liked the moments of sort of like musical aspects where there's a dance montage in the library for really no reason, but it's fun. Maybe it's because they're bored. There's that reason. And there's a part where they all are whistling in unison, and then the principal walks in and Bender's like, dun 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 dun, like a mood killer. The teacher's back. It's perfect, and it's so small, and you might not even remember it, but it's those details that are good. And I really like the close-up on their shoes when they're running in the hallway. It's just so good. And you get like Ali Sheedy's worn Converse, like they're really worn in, or otherwise known as Chuck Taylors. And you get Claire's like combat boots and her little accents of lace, and it's just so good. It's so good. So yeah, I wanted to touch on some scenes that I liked. Now let's talk about Claire, also known as our princess. Claire is the, I would say, stereotypical rich white girl who probably always gets what she wants. She falls into social desirability politics, but on the good end of that. And I mean, even some characters, well, one character, Brian, says, "You're so conceited, Claire. Why are you so conceited?" And she sort of says, well, I'm not trying to be conceited, it's just the truth. And this is in reference to him asking her a question that is, after all this, are we even going to be friends? And she's like, no, honestly, we're probably going to say, like, we're probably going to say hi to your face and then, like, talk crap about you when you leave, just so we don't look less cool in front of our friends. And Bender says, you're a bitch. I actually hate their conversations throughout the film because I think Bender's being really rude to her for no reason a lot of the time. But this one time I'm going to give him a pass because I do think that Claire is a bitch. But I also think it's super easy for a woman who is really confident in herself, especially a young woman who is confident in what she says. It's really easy for people in general, but especially men, to say that she's a bitch because she comes across as bossy or something like that, right? But in this small instance, I will say that Claire is definitely a bitch. But what I do like and will like about her always, well, for one, Molly Ringwald played the hell out of this character. And this character specifically, I think, is different from her other roles with John Hughes films, but she essentially is just being honest. Even if it is coming across as bitchy, I don't think it's disguised as like, oh, I'm gonna say that I'm being honest, but I'm actually being bitchy. It's bitchy because it's wrong, but she's being honest in a way that I don't think a lot of kids are honest about. And that's with peer pressure and upholding social norms by association and proximity to other rich people. Something I will never understand. But, she feels like she has a reputation to uphold, right? But she's also miserable. Her parents fight all the time. She says she wishes she could live with her brother. I think at one point they asked her, like, if you had to choose what parent to live with, who'd you choose? She would choose neither. So clearly there's a deeper issue there, and it's a smaller issue maybe compared to some of the other characters and the things going on with them, but just because it's maybe not an emergency issue doesn't make it invalid and doesn't make it not important. I mean, her parents are the people that are raising her, the people that she's learning from, so it's important, They're supposed to be her, I guess idols, people that she's supposed to look up to, that's always going to start with your parents. So Claire is sassy. She doesn't take crap, She's bougie. Let's be clear. I really like her. I really like her character. She's not my favorite character, but she's definitely like the top 3. I'd say Allison or Ali Sheedy's character is my favorite, and then I like Brian a lot too. But yeah. So Claire does get a lot of shade throughout the film from all the characters at some point. And I don't think all of it is justified, to be honest. I just think she's an easier target. But she is mostly unbothered by a lot of it. And I think my favorite scene is when her and the basket case have their little heart-to-heart moment, just because I like that the two girls get together and like have a moment to get away from the guys. I'm sorry if you guys are hearing the water. It's raining so hard, I don't really know what else I can do, but you know, try to keep going. But you're getting the real deal here, okay? And yeah, I really like their heart-to-heart because there's just something about women having each other's back, but like genuinely, not just saying they do and then not having each other's back. Like two women very clearly supporting each other and not giving a damn what anyone has to say. That's what I really love about that aspect of the film. And yeah, that's my favorite moment for that specific reason, with her in it. But I don't have any other moments that I like. I think a lot of her banter is good when it's with the other characters. I think her character is really self-explanatory. You don't have to delve too deep into it. She is pretty readable. I don't think a lot of layers get taken off from her, and I don't think the film does that in general. Yeah, so that's our princess, Miss Molly Ringwald herself, okay, legend. Then let's go ahead and talk about Andrew. Okay, so Andrew is like the boy version of Claire. He's a wrestler, he's popular. I don't know if he has the money that Claire has, but he's definitely in close proximity to her. There's some point where he's like telling her about a party and also trying to keep it hush-hush from the other people because clearly they're not invited, just her and him. It seems like exclusive, but also like elitist. And he is essentially in detention because he bullied someone very violently and graphically. Another kid in the locker room. I think they like ripped his hair off of him. It's terrible. And he admits that it's very fucked up what he did. And I think that's what's redeemable about Andrew, is that he feels the guilt of what he's done and the weight, and he understands that it doesn't need to happen again. But the thing that got him there is partially him just not being a great person and also his parents. So, you know, he talks about how his dad says you have to be first. You can't blow your chance on being like a professional athlete by doing stupid shit like this. But the problem with his father's viewpoint of this is that the father is only worried about him blowing his chance and not the fact that his kid is an asshole, right? And the good thing about Andrew, and also the bad thing, is that he recognizes that that's a problem. He recognizes that he doesn't want to be like his father, along with a lot of the other characters. They don't want to be like their parents. They want to be better than their parents, which I think is normal. I think that we take the things about our childhood that we didn't like and we try to do better. And sometimes you end up being just like your parents, or you only have certain qualities. Hopefully the good qualities, because everyone has bad qualities, but hopefully the better qualities, and you go from there and you do better. I think that's what most parents want, for their kids to do better than them. But yeah, so that could also be the driving force as to why his dad is such, a helicopter parent and like nearly a stage dad with Andrew when it comes to sports. And it's terrible to have someone who knows that they did wrong, but also knows that he's going to keep giving in because this is all he knows, right? Even with that guilt. It's fucked up, and it's why we keep creating generations of terrible people. It's a whole thing with, some stereotypes of athletes, you know, it's complex. I'm not going to get into it, but something cool about Andrew is he does sort of connect with Sheedy's character, the basket case, and for some reason they're a lot more comfortable with each other, and I think he's just more comfortable with talking to her because he feels like she won't judge him, although it takes a minute, because I think in the beginning when they're talking about, you know, what they like to drink or something, and she has to really pull out why he's there, and they're like fighting about it, but later, you know, that's what comes out. I'm just not thinking that. I don't remember why Claire was in detention. It was probably bullying or skipping class. I can't even remember, so it probably isn't really that significant. Like I said, Claire is like cool and I like her, but she's kind of surface level and readable, so it's whatever. But anyway, my favorite scene with Andrew's character, outside of the one where he gets Bender in a headlock, is also when they're sitting down in the huddle and he talks about his dad, and he pretty much just spews the same rhetoric that his dad spews at him. You gotta be number one. You know, that's terrible. And so accurate, man. Okay. But yeah, that's my favorite scene with him, specifically the huddle scene where they're in a circle. Now, I'm gonna kind of rush this a little because it's getting difficult to do this podcast right now with the rain, but hopefully it calms you a little bit while you're listening. If not, I apologize. Maybe I'll be able to edit it. So we have the final character that I haven't spoken about out of the 5 main characters, and that's Sheedy's character, Allison. I believe that's her name. I always refer to her as Sheedy because that's the actress's name, and she was also in another film with Matthew Broderick known as, I think it's War Games. She's pretty good in that. She's also in, what's that movie called? St. Elmo's Fire. Andrew in that? I know Rob Lowe was in that. Anyway, a lot of these actors in the 80s were in a lot of movies together. So I'm like spiraling right now thinking about all of them, and I really like 80s films. So anyway, sorry about that rant, that little detour I took right now in my mind. So basket case. So in the first part of this film, she doesn't say much of anything, and throughout the film, when she does interact, it's just a lot of sounds, grunts, small squeals from her, which is fine. I feel like that's realistic too. You know, we all have those students who maybe are more eccentric or paralyzed with awkwardness and maybe even anxiety that wasn't diagnosed at the time, and they're very much like her. She keeps to herself. She likes wearing that black shit on her eyes. You'll understand the reference if you watch the movie. And she doesn't care really what people think, mostly because she's never had to, I think. And she even says, like, she doesn't have any friends, so, like, who's gonna judge her? Like, who's gonna judge her? She is literally in detention because she had nothing better to do. That's literally what she says, which is hilarious to me. I don't know why, but it's funny. Like, she just decided, oh, I'm gonna go to detention today because I have nothing better to do. Like, girl, really? You could have took a nap. You could have watched a movie. I'm sure you could have found something. But as we peel the layers from that, I see that her parents seem to care about her. They don't really know where she is half the time. They don't seem to care about not knowing where she is half the time. She is obviously, for a valid reason, very bothered by this. She wants to run away because of this. Her home life is unsatisfying. And, you know, I think Andrew or another character says, everybody's home life is unsatisfying. Otherwise, why would you ever leave, right? And I mean, yeah, but there's layers to this, and we see that she probably is in detention because she has nothing else to do, but probably because she doesn't want to be at home. I mean, it's even shown at the very beginning of the film where they're all sort of being dropped off by their parents, besides Bender, who walks there, probably because his parents are trash. And her parents drop her off, but they speed off. We don't get like a little lovey-dovey or a lecture, because even when your parents are lecturing you and disciplining you, there's still like an aspect of love there, and that's just not shown with her family. It's sad, and I like her the most because she is unapologetically herself. And I think a lot of kids are afraid to just be themselves, are afraid to sit and look at themselves and try to fix the things that they don't like about themselves, that are them fixing them for themselves, not for others, right? So I think a lot of kids do sit and look in the mirror and they compare themselves, and that's why they try to fix what they think is wrong with them. But I don't think kids really think, oh, this is who I am. There's this aspect that is actually pretty bad about who I am. I'm going to change that because I want to, and like morally. It's usually, this is what people think is not good enough from me, so this is what I'm going to change, and I'm going to obsess about, and I'm going to do that. And she is the one character that admits everything. I can play all these roles, you think you know me, but you don't, which is essentially what all of them are saying. And again, it's heightened in Brian's monologue. But, I'm a liar today, I'm a thief tomorrow. I think she likes the attention, of course, and I think it's mostly because she doesn't get that at home. Maybe I'm getting too deep in that, but she still ultimately reveals that in the end, and she is one of the characters that I think has the most potential to grow into what she says that she wants to be. And she seems very in tune with herself. I mean, they're going around, and again, I keep talking about this huddle scene. It's where they're all sitting down in a circle, and I'll probably put a picture there, and they're discussing, their little hidden talents, and we get into this deep, deep conversation of why they're there, and the onion is fully peeled, and layers upon layers upon layers before they, go home, and, they're done, and probably will never talk to each other again, which is so sad. But, they already said that's probably what's going to happen. And anyway, she says, when you grow up, your heart dies. And John says, who cares? And she says, well, I care. Right? Because the adult version of you sort of hardens your heart. And maybe that sounds stupid, but I think it's kind of true. When you're a kid, you definitely get a lot more freedom, and I mean, to a certain extent, let's not pretend like kids aren't restricted for a lot of reasons, but there's a little bit of freedom there that you don't get as an adult. And ultimately, you look back when you're 70 and you finally get to rest when you're 70 years old, if you even get to 70, and you're thinking, oh, I wish I was a kid again, or oh, well, I lived a full life, but really you just remember being a student and working yourself to death. And then, I guess, putting all that new stuff on your kid. I'm not saying everyone is like this, but that seems to be the situation going on with all these kids, these teens. When you grow up, your heart dies. That's such a good quote, and again, a telltale, I don't know if she improvised this, I think John probably wrote that, but it's a telltale to his skills on, again, encompassing and capturing that teen vulnerability and authenticity that a lot of people haven't been able to do and won't ever be able to do. And her character really brings that full circle at the end of the film. So that is really all from all of the characters, sort of their role in the film. I think ultimately the best way to understand them is to watch the film and decide which one's your favorite, why or why not. Decide why you think this film is a classic, why you think it maybe shouldn't be a classic. I don't know. I think it should be a classic. I think I understand exactly why it's a classic, and I think it deserves all the acclaim that it has, even with its flaws, which I can't say for all films, but I can say for this one. And this still is one of my favorite 80s movies. I'm not going to say it's my favorite. It used to be my favorite. Like, I was obsessed. Had the posters, the, soundtrack is incredible. Simple Minds, Don't You Forget About Me. Like, it's just classic. But with time, you grow up, you find things that you like. Maybe you don't like them so much anymore. And while I still really love this film, and I think it's something that everyone should watch at least once, I don't consider this to be my favorite film of all time. I don't know that I'll ever have a favorite film of all time, but it's definitely not my favorite 80s movie. It's just in the top 3. It's definitely in the top 3. But I used to love it so much. I actually know this film to the point where from the beginning to end, it's been a while since I watched it just because I've been really busy, but I knew all the dialogue. I knew who was saying what without even looking at the screen. I knew what was coming up. I knew the songs, and it just reminded me how much I really know this film. And I don't think I'll ever be able to watch this film and from just solely an entertainment point of view, just because I know so many specific facts about it and like behind the scenes that it's just like impossible for me to watch it from just like a viewer entertainment point of view. I just know so much about it. Like, I cannot just watch it from the regular viewer point of view and just like have fun with it. And it's not that I'm not having fun, it's just like I'm thinking about how when Molly and Bender are like fighting, Claire and Bender are fighting, I'm thinking about how they were fighting probably off set. Just things like that. It's just different. And yeah, I think that you should watch The Breakfast Club at least once in your life. I will always vouch for that. I think everyone should watch it at least once, especially teenagers. Please be mindful of the things that I spoke about that are issues with the film. Actually pretty bad things about the film, but overall it's a classic, and I think it deserves to be a classic. And if you're feeling like you want to go on an 80s spiral, you should also watch Pretty in Pink, 16 Candles, not even just John Hughes films, but just 80s films in general. Maybe watch, I think Dirty Dancing dropped in the 80s, but it was set in a different time frame. Watch, what's another one? Ferris Bueller's Day Off, They're all really good. A lot of the same actors are in them. You'll see, Some Kind of Wonderful, Say Anything. Those are the real gems. Some better than others. So I will leave you with that. It's been great. Have a great day.
Is that each one of us is a brain and an athlete
and a basket case, a princess,
and a criminal. Does that answer your question? Sincerely yours, The Breakfast Club.